police in Myanmar admitted there had been a setup. The Burmese military said the massacre that was reported did indeed happen. And yet, after 8 months in prison, 2 Reuters journalists, Wa Lon and Cha So-u, have been sentenced by a Burmese judge to 7 years in jail. Their crime? Obtaining secret state documents as they researched the killing and mass burial of 10 Rohingya men in 2017. The story of the ethnic violence against minority Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar has been in the headlines for over a year now. International media have had access into the country severely restricted, and much of the local media have taken the government and military side over the treatment of the Rohingya. Amid stories of military-orchestrated violence, recently confirmed in a United Nations report, the trial and sentencing of the Reuters reporters captured attention inside and outside Myanmar. The Listening Post's Meenakshi Ravi now on the case of Wa Lon and Cha So-u and the very high price journalists in Myanmar pay if they report unfavorably on the military.
Outside a courtroom in Yangon, Myanmar, on the morning of the 3rd of September, journalists awaited news on the sentencing of 2 Burmese reporters, Wa Lon and Cha So-u. The verdict came down, 7 years imprisonment, and just as they had done so many times in the 8 months before this, the 2 men came out, declared their innocence, and were hauled into a police van to be driven away to jail. Reuters' Asia editor Kevin Krolicki was inside the courtroom when the judge issued the sentence against his colleagues.
We had been prepared, intellectually prepared. We knew it was possible that the judge would rule as he did, but nothing can prepare you for confronting injustice as it happens. It's very heartbreaking for the families of Wa Lon and Cha So-u. They both have young families.
We've been following this case from the beginning. We already knew that there will be harsh standards. It is actually pathetic. I mean, it is not very good, particularly in this moment. But I think it is not surprise to us because we've been through this harsh situation for long.
Wa Lon and Cha So-u were arrested in December last year. A Burmese policeman admitted in court that the men had been entrapped. They had been researching a story about the mass killing and burial of 10 Rohingya men in Myanmar's northern Rakhine state. The police offered them key secret state documents that would corroborate their findings. The documents were in fact not secret. The situation was a setup, and the reporters were arrested and charged under the Official Secrets Act, a law that has been on the books since 1923, when Myanmar was called Burma and was a colony of Great Britain.
These 2 Reuters journalists were one of the few journalists in Burma that were actually doing investigative work into the situation in Rakhine State. They were sentenced under a colonial-era law, the Official Secrets Act, but other oppressive laws are extensively used as well. The Unlawful Associations Act, the Peaceful Assembly Act, the Penal Code. There's a whole raft of repressive laws.
These 2 journalists risked their freedom and their life to expose a genocide. They exposed the highest crimes, the worst crime committed by the Burmese military. And this is the biggest threat for the military, so they will never tolerate this.
Myanmar's government has a unique structure, unlike any government anywhere else. In 2016, Aung San Suu Kyi, the political activist who had been kept under house arrest for 15 years during the military dictatorship, took up the post of state councillor, akin to a prime ministership. It was a momentous event.
An historic day for the Burmese people.
Around the world, Myanmar's transition from a military to civilian government was heralded as the start of an era of democracy for the country. The reality was never quite so simple. 25% of parliamentary seats are reserved for the Burmese military, and, as mandated by the constitution, 3 key ministries, Home Affairs, Defence and Border Affairs, are headed by serving members of the military. For Aung San Suu Kyi and her NLD party, being in government has effectively meant working alongside and often in subservience to her former captors.
Obviously, Aung San Suu Kyi and her government are limited in their powers because the military are still very much in control. The military control the police and much of the judiciary. So Aung San Suu Kyi's government cannot stop the police arresting journalists or other human rights activists. However, they do have the power to stop prosecutions going forward, and also under presidential amnesties they can release political prisoners. But more importantly, they have the power to repeal these repressive laws that are being used. But we've seen none of those actions by the government.
In terms of NLD, in 2050, there is an election manifesto. There is particular promise about media. None of them yet fulfilled, and we are very disappointed about it. So media freedom is not priority in this country.
Reporting in local Burmese outlets on the violence against the Rohingya people has been poor. It isn't just intimidation, censorship, or lack of access that has affected the coverage. Many Burmese have grown up hearing political and social rhetoric against the Rohingya, calling them vermin, illegals, and a threat to the Buddhist majority. A lot of this language has been reproduced in the country's media over the years. And yet, when it has come to the case of Wa Lone and Chaw Soe Oo, journalists in Myanmar have largely shown solidarity. This case has set a worrying precedent, and they can see the danger that faces them all.
If you look at this media in Burma, majority of them, the tool of the propaganda machine of the military. And they have spread so many hatreds and misinformation about the Rohingya minority. But these two journalists, when they were arrested, media speak out, but they are not saying these two journalists exposed the crime of the military, but actually these media are focusing on the press freedom.
Whether media in Myanmar choose to report on it or not, the role of the country's military in the killings and forcing out of Rohingya Muslims has been documented in international reporting.
The UN team said estimates that the military's scorched earth tactics have led to 10,000 deaths are conservative.
And most damningly, in a recent report published by the United Nations Human Rights Council. The report states that the Burmese Commander-in-Chief, Min Aung Hlaing, and his deputies bear, quote, greatest responsibility for the ethnic cleansing of Rohingya people. The government declined our request for a statement on Wa Lone and Chaw Soe Oo's case. In a press conference, however, a spokesperson said the sentencing of the journalists was the clearest indication of an independent and a functioning judiciary. There had been hopes that Aung San Suu Kyi would use one of the few powers she does hold to grant a pardon to the reporters. That didn't happen, and in a media landscape already intimidated and controlled by the state, there's now a chill more intense than it has been in the past few years.
Whatever happens now, nothing can make up for the 8 months that Wa Lone and Chaw Soe Oo have been separated from their families, deprived of their freedom, and unable to work as journalists. But it is important now that the injustice of this conviction, that the prison sentence be overturned.
It does send a very chilling message to the media in Burma, whether they are released under amnesty later or not. A very strong message given about reporting on issues connected to the military, issues relating to Rohingya and the situation in Rakhine State.
Unfortunately, the verdict, if anything, provides support to those in the security forces who sought to cover up evidence of a real crime. Those who participated in that mass killing were sentenced to 10-year prison terms. The 2 men who exposed the killing were sentenced to 7 years. That's an injustice by any standard, and it can't be allowed to stand.